Okay, in Chapter 9 review, let's go ahead and hit start at number 11 here. So we're talking about period length, so best to start at 0 and just figure out where does it start repeating itself. So right here, I start to go up again, then down, -1 back to 0, and boom, I start repeating itself. I go up, down to 0, and then back up to 0, right? So it starts repeating itself at 0 and to 20, so 20 minus 0 is 20. So there it is. The hard part is sometimes when these are fractions or we have pi in there, they might be a little bit harder or to identify what these tally marks are, but they kind of give us those tally marks. But it's always the difference between where it starts and where it stops, okay? And distance is always positive, okay? Here, a turbine one, we don't really have to worry about that. Basically just wants to convert it from minutes to seconds. And so if we have in 1 minute we have 18 rotations, we can just multiply that by in 60 seconds we have 1 minute. So it's just simple conversion here, right? Those would cancel out. I could reduce this down to 3/10, right? So 10 seconds we get 3 rotations in that, so that would be the one, but don't worry about that one. Okay, period length again. Here, when does it start repeating itself? Starts here and doesn't repeat itself till it gets up here, and we can see that it switches because then it looks the same right there. So we go from 0 all the way to 40, so 40 minus 0 is 40. So there's our period length. Amplitude, you can do it 2 ways. You can just take what's the highest number and what's the lowest number and what's the distance between there. So what's the distance between 3 and -3? That'd be a distance of 6. But amplitude is from the midline up to the top, or from the midline down to the bottom. So we got to divide this by 2. So that's where we get this 3 here. Okay, or you can find that midline, which is directly in the middle, and it's from the midline up to the top and from the midline to the bottom. Just what is that distance there? Okay, when we're looking at an equation here, our amplitude is just what's being multiplied by the trig function, but we got -5. That negative just flips our graph over the x-axis, so that negative doesn't really matter, so I'm just looking at absolute value, so that would just be 5. Okay, so amplitude doesn't have a negative. Okay, period. For sine and cosine and secant and cosecant, we take 2 pi and divide it by b for our period, or we do 360 divided by b. So ours for our period would be 360 divided by 4, which is 90 degrees, right? So our period is 90 degrees. Okay, select all that, apply. Now tangent, our period is 180 over b, or pi over b, because it takes only 180 between it repeats itself. And then where we start, right, where we start with tangent always starts, our first x is -pi-halves, right? So I got to take what I'm taking the trig function of 2x and set it equal to -pi-halves. So when I solve this, I divide by 2, and dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2. So my first x is going to be -pi-4. And at the first x, my y values are undefined, right? Vertical asymptotes, undefined, and then I go -1, 0, 1, and then undefined, right? So instead of my first x being -pi-halves to start, because of that 2x in there, it's actually going to start at -pi-4. Okay, so -pi-4, and it says select all that apply, right? But then I have 3 others, and then I have undefined as my last x, right? Or my last y value is undefined, so that'd be my 5th x, right? So I need to find out what's the distance in between here. So that's for interval length, we take our period and we divide that by 4. So our period would be pi over 2b, or sorry, pi over b. And so our b is what's being multiplied by x, what I'm taking the tan function of, and what's being multiplied by x, so that's 2. So our period would be pi over 2, okay? Or we can do 180 divided by 2 is 90, right? Or 90 degrees. Same thing with this. We could write this in degrees as well. That'd be -45, right? -45 degrees. Okay, so then we can just go ahead and take our period, 90, and divide it by 4, and that is 22.5, right? So 22.5. So then I can take, or we don't even have to do that. We can, that's fine. And then keep on adding 22.5 until I get to this x, and then I know where it's also undefined. Or I know my period is 90, or pi-halves. So if I just add 90 to this, add 90 to -45, that's going to tell me what this last one is, because that's when it starts repeating itself, right? Every period length it repeats itself, so it's going to go from undefined to undefined. So that would be a positive 45 degrees, which is pi fourths. So that would be easier, not even using this interval length. We don't have to do that. All right, so there's it for that. So tangent, you have to set equal to negative pi halves. Find that first x, that's where it's undefined, and then you can just add your period length to find out where the ending is at pi fourths.